is Techstrong TV.
Hi everyone, I'm Bonnie Schneider, bringing you in-depth sustainability insights on Techstrong TV. Today, we enter the fascinating intersection of cybersecurity and sustainability. This is where Palo Alto Networks, a global cybersecurity leader, is making significant strides. Joining me now is Vince Digneo, Head of Sustainability, Climate, and Clean Energy. Vince has been leading Palo Alto's efforts in addressing climate challenges through their participation in the EPA's Green Power Partnership. Vince, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's great to be here.
Vince, can you start with sharing with our viewers a little more about your background and your professional journey and your current role at Palo Alto?
Right. It's easier to work backwards, but I joined Palo Alto Networks in July of 2021. And that's as their first sustainability lead. So I basically helped pull everything together specifically for sustainability. Prior to that, I was 8 years at Adobe. I also started their sustainability program in 2013. And then prior to that, I was at Hewlett Packard, where I was doing the same sort of role. So I've been in this space quite a while.
That's great. So what brought you to what made you make this move?
Yeah, it's a great question because if I look at Palo Alto Networks, it's a leader in cybersecurity. In my mind, it's the leader in cybersecurity. And the technology behind cybersecurity is very deep. It's, you hear a lot of sort of noise about other technologies, but cybersecurity, it always has to be out in front of any threat. And so the technology to be able to do that has to be greater than anything else that's out there, greater than any threat there is. So that's really attractive to me. I've been in tech my entire career. And the notion of being in some of the deepest technology is really attractive to me. So that's really what brought me here.
That makes sense. Let's talk about Palo Alto Networks' collaboration with the EPA's Green Power Partnership. How does that work?
Yeah, so the EPA has that Green Power Partnership. It's been around for quite a while. It was while I was at Adobe, even at Hewlett Packard. And it's essentially looking at companies that are making progress on deploying renewable energy to power their business. And what I really like about it is it's had a very specific focus on true renewable energy, not offsets, not unbundled renewable energy certificates, but true renewable energy. This I like because I don't believe in offsetting to basically, achieve a goal or to create a marketing statement. So I really like the way the EPA has managed this progression and how they're encouraging and actually highlighting companies that are making true progress. So that's essentially what they do. And I think what it aligns perfectly with some of the, the broader federal government climate goals to be able to encourage companies to be able to do this sort of thing. And then now, even with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's incentives to be able to make this happen more completely. So I think everything is coming together in a good way for these things to make real progress.
Yeah, it seems that the Inflation Reduction Act definitely has started up a lot more of these efforts as well. But moving to a more social issue, I wanted to talk about climate injustice, a global concern. Obviously, many organizations are doing what they can to make a statement and to position themselves in a position where they can make a difference in this area. How is Palo Alto contributing to address climate injustice?
I'll start out by saying kind of the conclusion, which is we are doing our part. And that is essentially we recognize that, and then especially over the last few years where we have these overlapping crises, where basically the poorest among us are suffering from the worst elements of climate change. And, it's essentially because they can't afford to do better. And this is something that I think is relying on all of us, all major corporations, to come together and solve this problem as a coalition. I can't do it alone. And what I start out by saying we're doing our part is that we are trying to get our employees to be educated in this, to adopt decarbonization for their homes, put solar panels on their roof if they can. If they can't, purchase into a community choice aggregation where they can get renewable energy where they live. So we're trying to make our employees stewards for what we are trying to do. And on top of that, our work with other companies, with our peers, is what I see as one of the most critical elements of this, because we can move mountains with policy changes. And I think, if we're getting all of our peers, and you look at the tech community, which interestingly enough, I mean, we are mostly customers of ourselves. We're very few sort of competitors. We're customers of each other. And what we compete on, not necessarily product, it's on talent. And so when we come together and we sort of lift each other up, the talent becomes very interested in working for these companies. And as such, they're well educated in this space. We try and leverage them to do their part in the communities where we work and live.
That makes sense. Sustainability is leading conversations in data and software development. Can you outline how sustainability fits into the cybersecurity landscape?
Yeah, this is interesting because I think, certainly more recently, AI has become, buzzwords. And this is something that companies like Palo Alto Networks has been doing for quite a while. There's elements of machine learning in just about everything that this business does. It's going to be increasingly more important. And so there's questions about what is the sustainability of that, so of heavy computing. And if you look at traditional data centers, I mean, they eat up a lot of electricity, a lot of energy. And on its own, if it's placed on a grid where it's coal powered or even natural gas powered, it's not that sustainable. And if you look at some of the data centers, like I would applaud Google for a lot of the renewable energy deployment that they're doing tied directly to their data centers. So even though you may not be able to track the electrons from the renewable generation, solar or wind or whatever, to the data center, they're putting it on those grids where once they purchase into this large renewable energy, the data center's emissions decrease, but everybody on that grid is getting a chance to purchase into renewable energy themselves at a lower cost. So it's cleaning up the grids as well. And I think, if you look at that just from a compute point of view, Palo Alto Networks is in all these data centers. Essentially, we are the cybersecurity provider through the clouds and through our hardware in those data centers. So it's kind of it's a hand-in-hand partnership. In the same way with the compute, it is with the sustainability, it is with the renewable energy, it is in solving the greater sort of challenges of climate injustice as well.
Obviously, one of the impacts of climate change is that we're having more frequent extreme weather events that are more severe and longer lasting. That's affecting our power outages. And often there's that fear during a power outage, that's when there's going to be a cyber attack. So I was wondering, in your background with sustainability and cybersecurity, if that is a concern of how we're going to handle going forward these greater potentials for power outages with more extreme weather and affecting more people, and where you see cybersecurity's role in that.
Yeah, this is a perfectly apropos question for right now, because if you look over the last few days with flight delays, bad weather, the worst air in the world in Chicago yesterday, and if you look at the extreme heat in the South, this isn't a one-off sort of thing. This is happening more and more frequently. And I think, the way that I look at this, especially like where we can play a role, is resiliency. Cybersecurity is like the backbone of resiliency. And if you look at grid modernization, which is something that is trying to get going right now, it will rely on the best cybersecurity to make sure that exactly what you were saying is not going to happen, that these threats aren't going to break through just because there's some sort of other either climate or infrastructure breakdown. So I think that if we're looking forward, and we should be, and you look at the infrastructure across the U.S., it should be connected and it should be resilient and it should be protected. And that's where we come into the system.
Makes sense. Palo Alto Networks was recently recognized on the CDP 2022 Climate A list. Can you explain what that is and the significance of it?
Yeah, it's at first it sounds like a bunch of jargon, but basically what it is, it's reporting. It's us reporting on our sustainability. So our greenhouse gas emissions, what we're doing, our goals to try and reduce them. And I look at two elements that are fundamental to that. Science-based targets, which we've set, and they were recently verified. So the science-based targets basically is a set of directions for you to set goals for your company. And it was originally coming out of COP, I think it was 26 out of Paris, the Paris Climate Accord. And basically, they work hand in hand with CDP, which is the reporting outlet, World Resources Institute, World Wildlife Fund, so that they're looking at it from a scientific point of view. And this is really the fundamentals of everything that I do. We need to be data-driven. We need to use scientific methodology to basically act on the data, to set goals, and then take actions forward. So that's fundamental to what I do. And CDP itself is where you put all this information every year. It's lengthy. It's a big process. We're right in the middle of it right now. And you turn it into CDP, and they basically go through it and tell you how you did. And as it turns out, last year we've made the A list, and that was the first time for Palo Alto Networks, which is kind of amazing, given that I've been here 2 years, and we went from what I walked in on, which was a C, a grade of C, to A. So we've really stepped up our game. And CDP is one of those outlets that basically acknowledges that, and I think that that's great. But more importantly, I think, is the transparency of reporting. We post our CDP results online. It's public. Take a look at it. We need to be transparent about these sort of things. And I think if I was to talk to any of my peers about this, that's probably the best outcome of reporting to CDP, is that you get a pretty comprehensive assessment of how you're doing, and you're being transparent about it to share with anybody who needs to. And I look to investors, I look to customers, I look to suppliers, I look to our employees, to taking that information and saying, okay, I think this company is doing pretty well. That's great, keep going. And so I think that should be one of the main outcomes of this, the transparency and reporting and clarity of it.
And what role do you see IT and software development teams playing in advancing sustainability? A lot of our viewers from Techstrong TV work in IT and in software, and they may be watching this and wondering what can they do in their own organizations. So where do you see that fits in?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I'll go back to the energy intensity of IT equipment and that sort of thing. And I love the way that Amory Levin from the Rocky Mountain Institute frames this. Is you can squeeze so much energy efficiency into your business that ultimately, when you start powering it with renewable electricity, you're taking the minimum, not the maximum. But you're basically focusing on energy efficiency. You can solve a lot of problems. That's where I would start with this sort of thing. Basically, if you're running IT equipment out of your business, are you doing it efficiently? Can it be improved? Can you actually even, for example, like some data centers are using AI to figure out like when peak consumption is and try and adjust for that sort of thing. And even through deploying renewable energy at those times when, certainly at the times when the IT load is at its highest. So start with energy efficiency, decarbonize whatever you can, try and get rid of natural gas, try and, back up diesel generation, try and figure something else out. There are options now. Use storage, that sort of thing. And then even what you have left, deploy renewable energy to power that. So I think that there's an entire sort of thread of IT improvement that can be done just with that sort of thing. And then if you look at the IT equipment and how that's progressing, sort of the typical Moore's Law thing, which is each year, it improves by 7%, something like that. How can you go beyond that? In other words, how can you use your IT equipment in a way that there's less waste, there's less energy consumption? It's only being used when it needs to be. If it's a 24/7 thing like cybersecurity, got to be on all the time. So that's when you really should be looking at renewable energy. I think there's a lot of things that IT professionals can be looking at in order to streamline their businesses, reduce cost, elevate their brand through sustainability. So there's a lot there.
I agree. Looking at the bigger picture, though, since you've been working in this field for a while, what would you say are the emerging trends and developments at the intersection of cybersecurity and sustainability that you've seen and that you see emerging into the rest of 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, this is interesting because this question is coming up more and more about, and I spoke briefly about AI, that intersection as well. But I think some of the things that we need to be looking at are, what are we actually doing with programming? And I think, IT professionals would say code optimization. and sustainability, that's what I call it, green coding. But I think that that's a really important element to look at. Let's say, for example, you have some really big software program, million lines of code. It's been out there for a long time, seems to work really great. But perhaps there's 5% of it that could be artifacts, old lines of code that could be either removed or streamlined, optimized. Once you focus on that, if you're reducing 5% of a million line code routine, that's 5% of the energy that you're reducing. And if I look at it from the cybersecurity perspective, are there any latencies with having too much code that are artifacts or redundant or whatever else? So in other words, can you speed up the process of what you're doing? Simply by reducing code lines, you can reduce latency, energy consumption, and improve the performance of your software, in our case, cybersecurity.
And finally, can you give us a sneak peek into Palo Alto Networks' upcoming sustainability initiatives? What are you working on now?
It's good timing for that because our science-based targets got verified, I think, at the beginning of this month, which is a big step. That means now we got to act on them. And if I look at one thing that I think is going to be the most important piece, we have 3 science-based targets. One of them is reduce scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, like everybody else does. And really the way to do that, and for all of my peers, let's see what we can do to deploy renewable energy. That'll solve that problem. The second one is we intend to get 65% of our suppliers by spend to set science-based targets. Again, working together, set the targets, set renewable energy goals. We'll all work together on this sort of thing. The third is reducing our use of sold products. So basically our customers' emissions from them using our products by 40%. And this is emissions over gross profits with an intensity goal approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative. But what that means is that use of sold products is about 75% of our total footprint. It's massive. It makes the others look pretty small. And what we need to do is to help our customers get on renewable energy so that they're running our hardware or even our cloud software on renewable energy. Their emissions go down. That's part of it. The other part is the data centers that we're in. If they're using our products, either delivering them to customers or using them themselves, if they're doing it with renewable electricity, those emissions start going down. So once again, it comes back to the entire value chain, setting ambitious goals and deploying renewable electricity, and then working together to try and achieve it to 100%. Net zero gets a lot of noise these days. And the way that we define it is 90% elimination of your emissions, not offsetting, not sort of substitution, not passing, elimination. In other words, if we can shrink that together and get to 90%, by definition, I think it's the World Resources Institute and the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance says, if you do that by 90%, then you can mitigate the last 10%. That's what I'm looking for. 2030 is our objective for scope 1 and scope 2, 2040 for 1, 2, and 3. That's going to be really hard because right now, air travel, that sort of thing how do you do that? And you can't offset it. You've got to get rid of it. Now, I think we need to innovate our way out of this sort of thing. We've got a little time to do it, but not too much.
Well, that makes sense, and it's great to hear such ambitious goals from you. Thank you so much for your time and insights today. Vince Digneo, Head of Sustainability, Climate, and Clean Energy at Palo Alto Networks. It was a pleasure having you on, Vince.
It was a pleasure to be here, Bonnie. Thank you.
Great. Well, stay with us on Techstrong TV. We'll have a lot more coming up.